You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 320. And in this episode, I got on Alexandra Reynolds to share her OCD story with us. And in particular, we talk about some of her main themes, including contamination, relationship, health, and taboo themes. We talk about doing exposure and response prevention therapy. She discusses complex trauma, or cPTSD, and what it was like doing a separate trauma therapy. We discuss her attachment style, how cPTSD or complex trauma affected her relationships. She talks about disassociating in therapy. We discuss her attachment style in her relationship and working with this and through this. She talks about postpartum OCD, her experiences of group therapy, and so much more. A real wide-reaching episode. I really enjoyed speaking with Alexandra. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers affordable, effective, and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head over to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. So thank you to Alexandra for her time and her story, and thank you to you guys, as always, for listening. I deeply appreciate it. And without further ado, here is Alexandra. Welcome to the show, Alexandra.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. So, as you know, I'd love to hear your OCD story, and you can share as much or as little as you want.
Absolutely. I would love to share it with you, and I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, so whenever you're ready, please share away.
Oh my gosh. So where do I start? It's so much. So I first noticed that I had, signs of OCD at about 6 years old. I had an extremely anxious childhood. So I had a lot of nightmares and fears as a child that kind of morphed as I got older. Lots of things revolving organization and symmetry and contamination. I also had fears about being separated from my mother, to the point where I was taken to a psychologist, I think at around 7 or 8 years old, and diagnosed with separation anxiety disorder. And that was never followed up on, unfortunately. So they never did anything with that. But certainly it speaks to the level of anxiety I had, I think. And that just got worse as I got older. And it interfered with my schoolwork and with, my personal relationships. I was always very fearful of basically anything that was outside of what I felt was safe, which was essentially being at home. And I think it really kind of came to a head in my late teens. I started to diagnose myself with all kinds of physical ailments like cancer and heart conditions, and call this 24-hour nurse line and ask them about symptoms. And it's funny now, but it wasn't funny at the time. I was really convinced that I was fatally ill and I was dying. And then I started driving and went to college and got a little bit more freedom. And of course, OCD decided to attack my driving. And so I couldn't drive. I had a driving phobia. Every time I got in the car, I had a panic attack. This was on top of all the contamination fears I had and all the random, things that OCD loved to have me do. So I spent most of my time by my early 20s compulsing 24/7. And I had throughout all this, no idea what it was because I was undiagnosed. My family did not believe in psychology or in therapy. And I was told many times that going to a therapist was weak and that they are outsiders and meddlers and that they're just going to, interfere with our family and that I shouldn't speak to anybody about my fears or what I was going through because my brother and I would be taken away from our family. And so I was not allowed to get help. So I think that made it worse. It made my fears worse. And it made everything feel harder. And so when I was kind of able to get help later on in my late 20s, that was another barrier that I faced, was sort of coping with what that meant going against my family and my culture as a Latina, where, that kind of thing is still looked down upon to a degree. I was diagnosed with OCD by a lady who only did in vivo exposures and who did not, unfortunately, teach me much about ERP. And at that time, I didn't know anything about OCD. There wasn't a whole lot of information. We didn't have Instagram. We didn't have, unfortunately, the OCD stories. We didn't have any of that. And there wasn't too much online that I could find that felt reliable. So I had no idea that what she was doing wasn't necessarily the best thing. I learned enough to kind of white knuckle through the big things like driving, but I still, looking back on it, did nothing but live in fear with OCD in the driver's seat, attaching itself to everything I cared about and just compulse. So my relationships destroyed by OCD, jobs taken by OCD. I had depression because of OCD. I tried to commit suicide twice. I used substances. I couldn't cope. My life was always out of control. I would drag myself out of like this hole of depression and OCD and rebuild just to have it kind of come crashing down on me, a year, 2 years later. And it was always the same. And I always felt like, why am I different? Why can't I do the things that everybody else does? Why can't I just live a normal life like everybody else? Why is this so hard for me? And it felt so stigmatizing to live that way. When I would open up about having these struggles, I would be told things like, well, you should just be able to get over it. It's mind over matter. You're just not trying hard enough. Just stop worrying. I was like, man, I wish it were that easy. I think you'd think I would have done it by now. So I found my doctor, my current doctor, in my 30s, and realized as I was searching that there was this whole wealth of information on what OCD is and who I should be seeing. And so through that, I was able to find an actual OCD specialist who is still my specialist now and is a wonderful human being. And he saved my life. He taught me to do ERP. He taught me to just face my fears head on and to not give up. He taught me that I am a strong person. And he referred me out for my trauma therapy, which is something that has historically interfered with my ERP. So I owe a lot to him and to ERP and to the research, and all the knowledge we have now in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. Is there more you want to share before I kind of jump in, or?
No?
Yeah. Okay.
That was a lot.
So I got some questions around ERP before I get into that. So, complex PTSD or complex trauma. Anything you want to kind of say on that?
Oh my goodness, complex trauma. Complex trauma to me is it, it. I feel like it's similar to OCD in the sense that it is something that it infiltrates your entire life. It colors everything that you do, similarly to how OCD latches on to the things that we value or care about. Complex trauma, just by its nature, sort of destroys everything that it touches systematically because of the way that it makes us behave. It is a coping mechanism. It is a survival mechanism, I think, at its heart. And it usually starts in early childhood, and it comes from chronic long-term abuse. So the things that you do when you're in that survival state to help you as a child cope, like dissociate or compartmentalize your trauma, or develop a disorganized attachment style because you have to, because you depend on someone to care for you, but you're also terrified of them. Those things are not healthy. The way that you view relationships is not healthy. For me, I tended to not trust anybody at all. And I would want people to be close to me, and to be, my friends or a partner, but then I would get afraid. And so I would push them away at the same time. Those things, they become maladaptive, and they hurt you. And there's also this kind of loss of your sense of self. You don't feel like you're like everybody else. You feel like an alien, I think, is what I used to call it. I felt like an alien. I was disassociated or depersonalized a lot. And I just felt like everybody else had this kind of a sense of who they were, this very strong sense of who they were. And they had this life history that they had. And for me, I didn't really ever know who I was. I felt ungrounded and alone and lost a lot of the time. And there's a sense of, I think, helplessness that comes with that. And it's, it plays right into the OCD, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. Fuels it. I'm glad that you said it's maladaptive, because of course at one point, like thinking about your attachment style that you said, at one point that was adaptive. It kept you safe and it kept you going, but it's when you get older and you become into sort of safer, healthier relationships, the attachment style no longer serves you, and now it's getting you into trouble as opposed to keeping you safe.
Yeah, absolutely. It got me into trouble.
Yeah. No, trouble's the right word, but you know what I mean? Like, it causes problems for yourself and others.
Absolutely. Yeah. It does. It causes a lot of problems. It ruined relationships for me along with relationship OCD. And so they both just kind of end up serving as catalysts for each other, which I think drove those extreme periods of depression. I ended up feeling like I was trapped in my own mind and I couldn't relate to anybody. And I always felt alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is tough to feel on top of OCD. Yeah. So if you're okay to share, and you don't have to, but thinking about your family and how, they said things like, therapy is weak, or, that's not what we do, be it in the family or the culture. How have you sort of reconciled that now as you go through therapy, like two different types of therapy now, how has that been?
Yeah. I think at first it was hard. The first few times that I tried to get therapy, it was really hard for me to reconcile that. And I felt a lot of pain, trying to kind of reconcile really going against my family and doing what I wanted to do, which was try to go to therapy and get better. I was not allowed to major in psychology, which was what I wanted to do. And so, of course, me being me, I went and did it anyway, just when I moved out. Um, and so I think that also helped because I had gone through it. I got the degree. I knew what therapy was about. I knew, at least on a basic level, what psychology was about. And it kind of helped make me more receptive to therapy, I think. After a certain point in time, I honestly got so desperate to get help because I felt like I wasn't going to be alive if I continued down the path that I was on, that I stopped caring. I didn't care anymore. And once I actually got real help, I didn't care what they said because I knew deep down inside of me that this was changing my life finally and that it was where I needed to be.
Nice. Okay, good. I'm glad. And another question that comes to my mind, just thinking again about attachment styles, and obviously we all have one. In your relationship, again, if you're okay to share, how's that journey been with your husband to slowly kind of, I guess, work through both of your attachment styles, whatever his is, you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my husband is a wonderful person, and he has a very normal attachment style. He he has been very patient, and I have to give him that he has been extremely patient with kind of my inconsistencies in my attachment with him and, my personality, because complex trauma, it takes away, your kind of personality, like you're fragmented. You have compartmentalized so much trauma, and there are parts of you that are still stuck in what my therapist calls trauma time. But there's this other part of you, which I don't know if you know about, the ANP, the apparently normal part, which is the part of the personality that continues to function normally. And so there's this ANP that functions most of the time, but sometimes when you're triggered, just like in regular PTSD, these emotional parts that carry trauma get triggered. And so they're more likely to come out, let's say, if I'm afraid or I feel threatened or there's conflict, like in marital conflict, or maybe I've seen something or smelled something that reminds me of something in my past. I may not even know what the trigger is, but these emotional parts will get triggered out, and all of a sudden I'm crying hysterically, or I'm angry and I'm screaming and I don't even understand why I'm screaming. Or maybe my stomach hurts and now I'm in the bathroom because my stomach hurts. It's a very kind of raw, visceral, knee-jerk, automatic reaction. It's that lizard brain that's activated, and you behave just like you would back then, like you're in danger. And so he has been extremely patient with all of those moments I've had where I have, been that way. And those moments that I've had where maybe I want to be close to him, but I feel like I can't, or maybe all of a sudden I've become fearful and I don't want to trust him. And it's been hard. It tested our relationship many times, and neither one of us understood what it was, why I would be one way and then behave a different way all of a sudden. And when I got into therapy for complex trauma, it really opened up both of our eyes to what was going on, and kind of gave us something more concrete, to work on.
Yeah, I like that. Absolutely. When you can understand it, you can work on it, and it's good that he's been able to be calm, and if calm's the right word, but, be a secure attachment effectively for you. And that I'm sure that's helping in its own way too. Okay. So with ERP, actually, one other thing, more of a comment, but you can say something on it if you want. It's more obviously thinking about the attachment style in a relationship. Then you couple that with relationship OCD.
Yes.
We could also argue no wonder that became a theme of yours, because the attachment style was already there to kind of give it fuel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, when you grow up that way, deep down, I think a lot of times, um, I knew I didn't want to be that way when I grew up and I had my own relationship and my own family. And so I think I put a lot of emphasis on that growing up. And of course, OCD just latched right onto every single relationship I ever had. Because that was one of my values.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So whether it's health anxiety, relationship OCD, or any other sort of theme, anything you want to say around doing exposure and response prevention therapy, just generally, or when you started doing it, or where you're currently at?
Yeah. Gosh, ERP is amazing. It really is. It's life-changing. And I will say that until I can't speak anymore, because it really is that life-changing for me. And I feel like I am proof that even people who are complex cases, who other therapists give up on and say, well, that's one of those difficult patients, which I've been called. I think that I am proof that that's not the case, that even the severe, difficult cases, we can get better with the right treatment. And thankfully for me, that is ERP and trauma therapy. I think ERP was really difficult for me at first because I had that cPTSD piece that was complicating treatment and making it very difficult for the lessons to kind of stick. So I went through an intensive, outpatient treatment when I first started with Dr. Josh, and that was many years ago. And I worked a contamination OCD hierarchy because that's my main kind of most persistent theme. And I learned the lessons, and I by all intents and purposes, I did really well. I got an A, but I went right back to my normal life, and I was right back to white knuckling it and, drinking a little bit too much to kind of numb out and cope with all the stuff that was in my head, and just right back to basically how I was, maybe a little bit better for the knowledge that I had, but not what you would expect, from someone who had just gone through pretty significant ERP and understood everything to the level that I understood it. And so he and I kind of, had this on again, off again kind of therapy relationship where, I didn't know what I was doing, and he was kind of trying to figure out what was going on with me. And it was then that he kind of figured out that it was this trauma piece that was complicating it in some way. And when we went to try and address the trauma, I disassociated immediately during therapy. And that's where he pulled the plug on that and said, you need to see a specialist. And so what was going on was I was disassociating during ERP and not getting that full benefit of the ERP because I was not present. And in my day-to-day life, I was kind of painting everything with this same broad brush of avoidance, which is, a huge part of trauma in general, especially complex trauma.
Yeah. Okay, nice. And when you went to see the trauma specialist, did you stop the ERP and then come back to it, or was it kind of side by side?
No, I really didn't think I needed to see a trauma specialist, to be honest. I really felt like, I was like, this is silly. I don't need to see this person. Like, I don't have trauma. But when I went to see her, I did not stop my ERP, and I still do both. I think Dr. Van Kirk,
Okay.
he talks about it being parallel treatments. So that's what I do right now. Once I have worked my last hierarchy, which I am on, hopefully I'll be able to stop the OCD treatment and just continue with the trauma treatment. But while actively doing ERP, I feel like there's a benefit to doing them kind of side by side, because you're learning how to ground yourself in trauma therapy and how to be present, which is so important in ERP. If you're not present, then you're not doing the work.
Okay, so yeah. So is there anything else you think that's helped you along this journey, that's been a support for you or helpful?
Oh my goodness. I think resilience. I think that resilience is a huge piece of why I'm still here and why I continued to try to reach out for help, no matter how many times I tried and failed. I think that it's important to honor that and acknowledge it. Hope that sometime at some point someone could help me and that I could get better. Learning to trust has been a huge thing. I think that having safe relationships and learning to cultivate an inner sense of safety is probably the most important piece. I never felt safe within myself. And I think that leaks out into relationships and life. I was always on edge, waiting for the next bad thing to happen. And sometimes when you're like that, you begin to perpetuate those things in your own life. It's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy. And so having both my now husband and a therapist to kind of work through those things with in a safe place, just learning to actually trust them and learning to be vulnerable was huge. Because when you can be vulnerable in a safe place, then you learn to trust yourself and your intuition and your own emotions.
Absolutely. Yeah, good way of putting it. Okay, and I'm sure there were many, but was there a key roadblock, that really kind of got in the way? And if so, how did you work through it, around it, over it?
Gosh, in ERP, I think my biggest roadblock really was that dissociation piece. Once I realized what it was, once I learned what it was and how it affected me, it opened my eyes. I was like, oh, this is why I'm not able to do this work and actually get better. And it sort of opened up this whole new world for me to look at and learn about, and bring that to my exposure response prevention treatment. When you're checked out most of the time because you want to avoid your emotions, and that's really depersonalization, derealization. I think those are kind of talked about in the OCD world. A lot of that is just a coping mechanism to want to avoid distressing emotions, which is why sometimes, with OCD, I think, we can kind of get that piece. We have intrusive thoughts and they're big and scary and they cause these, emotions. And so we want to check out because we don't know how to handle it. And so I think of this as kind of like that, but on a larger scale. And because you are so prone to do it as a child, it becomes this coping mechanism that you don't even realize you're using, and you just go to it immediately. Yeah. So when you spend most of your time checked out to some degree or another, it becomes very difficult to know how you're feeling, to verbalize how you're feeling, to feel really anything but numb. And that's completely counterproductive to when you're trying to learn to sit with uncertainty, sit with anxiety, to lean into that discomfort, and to do things anyway. And so I would go through the motions of ERP, but because I'm not sitting with that anxiety, mentally I'm in la la land. I couldn't progress. So I call it like superficial ERP.
Yeah. Yeah, you were going through the motions. Okay, well, I'm glad you got it. You realized that and we're working on it. So, similar question, but the opposite of, was there like a moment where it, I guess you could say this, but maybe something else that just made sense, like it just clicked, whether that's the way you look at OCD, trauma, or the treatment for either of those or anything else?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that there were a couple of different catalysts and they all happened within the past couple of years. I think the first big one was, this pandemic, and having my son at the same time. He was an infant when the pandemic hit, and I had already kind of been struggling to cope because I was a new mom, and that postpartum OCD that I don't think we talk enough about. It was a real thing, and it had latched onto my son and everything about him. He had food allergies as a baby, severe ones. And so my OCD had latched onto that, and I was ritualizing constantly to try and keep him safe. And this pandemic came and it just threw me for a complete loop. I remember sitting in an armchair with my baby, and I should have been overjoyed to have this beautiful baby. Even though he had allergies, he was still my beautiful baby. And I couldn't enjoy him because I was grieving like he was already dead, thinking that I had infected him with COVID-19. And I was grieving as if this were real. And it was just this extreme low point. And that really drove me back to therapy in a more, I think, serious way. I was put into or encouraged to go to group therapy along with my individual therapy at that point in time. And that was another big kind of aha moment for me where I was like, oh, there's more people who have OCD. I'm not alone in this. And it felt so good to share and to hear other people's stories. And from that kind of drove me toward the IOCDF and the streams that Ethan had started doing at that time during the pandemic. And it kind of fueled me on this journey to advocacy, which is kind of the last piece where everything really sort of clicked. Once I started getting out there and talking to other people and attending the conference and just learning more about myself and OCD and how it affects me, it gave me a better idea of what I was dealing with and what's OCD and what's my trauma and how seriously I should really have been taking this all along. It helped get rid of that stigma, and I think it was just all of that kind of came together in a way that allowed me to see things more clearly without the shame that I carried from having OCD.
Yeah, good point. So being in the group and feeling like you're not the only one and you're not alone. Do you think that was a catalyst, for your advocacy that you do now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was that kind of first little nudge, because I wanted more of it. And when the group ended, I was like, no, I wanted it all the time. I was, I think every other week, and it just, to me, it wasn't enough. I wanted it every week because it just felt so good to share. Having contamination OCD, I think sometimes is hard. All themes are hard, but I think that when you have that super stereotype theme, it's easy to dismiss yourself and say, well, this really is just the hand washing thing that everyone makes fun of. And so I didn't take it seriously.
Yeah, you're right. I think there has been, I don't know, from my perspective, there has been a kind of shift of Puro's rightly got the recognition it deserves, but sometimes there's almost a belittling, I feel, of other themes because they're not taboo in nature, but it doesn't mean they're any less painful,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not helpful necessarily to compare themes. I have taboo obsessions. A lot of them latch onto my son, which is extremely hard. And I think that there is a pain that comes with that I don't think that, comes with some of the other things, of the other themes. But at the same time, I don't think that should take away from the very real pain and distress that we feel with themes like contamination. They can certainly take over your life and cause very real pain. And I think even trauma in their own right. I mean, I think of, the times I've spent locked in my house because I am so fearful to go out. And that is certainly a very real, very distressing, and not healthy way to live. But I think that when it's stereotyped so heavily and you see characters, on TV and in movies have like this, they have germs and they have gloves and they've got the little spray bottle and that's what OCD is supposed to be. And someone tells you that you have it, there's this knee-jerk response like, that's not me and that's silly. And you don't want to take it seriously because you don't want to be that person.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so what your journey is, you're still on it, but it's been windy and twisty, and you've learned a lot. And so I guess just words of hope for anyone listening.
Oh my gosh, there is hope. There is so much hope, and I think if you've listened to the end of this, you're amazing. And thank you. But I also just want to say that I think if anything, that I want to be that beacon of hope and offer hope that no matter how long you have been suffering, that no matter how old you are and where you are in your life, that you can find someone to help you and you can get that help that you so rightfully deserve and get better and make your life more beautiful than you ever imagined. I mean, I never imagined that I would have a husband or a son, that I would still be alive. And, here I am. And just to offer yourself compassion for all the things that you have been through, because I think sometimes when OCD is in the driver's seat, when complex trauma is in the driver's seat, we do things that are out of character. We use substances to numb out. We do things that we would think, oh my gosh, only a bad person would do that. And it's so important to offer those parts of our journey and ourselves compassion because they come from a place of survival and pain.
Yeah, really, really good point. So you've got a billboard. What do you want written on that billboard?
Oh my gosh. What do I want written on a billboard? I think if I could have anything written on a billboard, it would be that hope and resilience are absolutely everything. And I think sometimes we put those two things down. I've seen people say, well, resilience isn't everything, or hope is not everything, or all you have is hope. And sometimes that's really all you have. And it's really all you need to carry you through. Not everybody has the same resources. Not everybody has the same, privilege in life. And sometimes that really is all that people have. And that's okay. That's okay. It's okay to just have hope and just be resilient and to do what you need to do to get by.
Yeah, really, really good point. Absolutely. So, your 20-year-old self, you could pick up the phone and call her. What would you tell her?
So many things. So many things. Gosh, I think I would tell her, you're a badass. And I don't always curse, but I really would. I would tell her, you are a badass and you don't even know it. You think that you're weak and you're so sad and lonely. And the truth is that you are a resilient, strong woman, and you are going to feel safe one day.
Nice. Yeah. Sure she would like that call. So lastly, is there anything else you wish you could have said today?
No, I think we covered it. You've been so wonderful. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been a real honor to hear it.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me share, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us with a one-time tip/donation, please go to theocdstories.com/support. All tips, no matter how large or small, are greatly appreciated. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/theOCD stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.